Good morning, everybody. Getting going live here on Instagram as well. And good morning. It's the Wifey Wake Up No Makeup podcast. And it's Saturday. And I have a lot to share today as I was putting together this podcast, these notes. I was thinking this might end up being longer than the usual 15, 20 minutes. So just a heads up there. This is a big topic, and it started out as a little topic, and I'm like, oh, this is really growing. So, talking about avoiding major dead ends in life, and this is for both the aspiring wifeys and those who may have been wifeys for just a few years or many years. And the thing is, life is life, right? You can't entirely avoid practically anything. But the more insight and the more foresight you have, the more likely you're going to be able to carve out a path that you want for yourself. But the big key is knowing what you actually want. And especially the younger you are, it's just innate. You haven't lived enough life. You don't know yourself well enough to really even know what you want yet. And so that's what we're getting at today. Just a moment. I have a tickle in my throat. So there were a couple of experiences very early in my life, early in my adult life, that were, one was extremely dramatic and I learned a lot of lessons, and one felt like it was extremely guided. And I'm so glad that I took that route. Both, one kind of put it was like an accident happened, right? I used the term in the title, avoiding major dead ends. Well, sometimes it's just because in life, like an accident happens right in front of you and you have to reroute, right? And there are certain things you just can't plan for. And then there are things that, you avoid maybe, or you see the dead end coming and you're able to reroute yourself. And those were, I'm going to start with a couple of experiences in my life to kind of illustrate where I'm going here and how this can be really helpful. So I should check my notes to see if this is even what I was planning. This topic, I tell you, this is probably going to be multiple episodes because it just can go in so many directions. And this is definitely something that I wish I had learned when I was in my early 20s in particular, but it can be helpful at any point in life. So I got married when I was 19 years old. It was not necessarily in my plans, but you can't always plan when you meet the love of your life. And I'm absolutely so grateful that I made the decision to get married and not just follow what I had been taught to do. And I'm not necessarily advocating ignoring your parents' advice and so forth, but it's at a point in life where you really have to start discerning for yourself if it is good advice that you're receiving. And that's what's so tricky about that stage in life, and really even later, because we are made up so much of our programming from our parents and our society that you do have to question, is that something that I really want, or is that something that I'm being told that I want? And boy, asking yourself those questions can really, really save you a lot of grief down the road. And that's the point of this topic, is avoiding those dead ends, that grief down the road, because you didn't see it coming or you chose to ignore it. So at that point in life, I had done college applications, had been taught, probably like many of you, to go to college, get a good job, then get married and all that. But like I said, you can't necessarily control when you meet the love of your life. And I was telling my husband the other day that, I'm so glad that I tuned into that inner sense of knowing that, this is the one. And I might not have another opportunity like this as far as meeting a guy. Fortunately, I didn't have a long list of qualifications for the person that I wanted to marry someday. It was just an inner sense and knowing. And so it was kind of like, I was telling John, my husband, the other day, like, how am I going to relate this? Because like, I know I know it's like poker, but I don't play poker. I just know enough about it. And then there's the song he said, he reminded me, it's by Kenny Rogers: know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, know when to run. And I think that totally can apply to dating as well. And I was really fortunate to sense like, okay, this is the one that I want to hold, right? This is the hand that I'm going to hold. I'm not going to let this one go. And even though that I was taught so fervently, to make sure you get the education, make sure you get the job, the career, that something in me just knew like this opportunity is not going to come up again. Certainly not like this. And this is the time to take this opportunity. And fortunately, also, as a result, I chose not to go to college. I found out, I was already making at that time, 20 some years ago, $25 an hour doing contract work. And from all the careers that I had studied, that, you go to the guidance counselor and they say, well, you be good at this, you be good at that. That's what I would have been making in a lot of those positions, plus paying off loans. And so I just did the math, and the math did not check out. And fortunately, because a lot of those in my generation were the ones that started speaking up about college loans and having assistance for paying off the college loans, I estimated I would easily be in $100,000 of debt by the end, not only just college alone, not including the living expenses and all that. So fortunately, I did the math. So that's one where I feel like I avoided a dead end in life because I really soul searched. I really, really used my mind, and as far as the college thing and doing the math, but then also my heart and my soul, as far as meeting my husband and deciding to get married, that, this is an opportunity I feel it may never come up again, and taking that opportunity. So that was a dead end avoided. I feel that really helped me to go, I'm going to take this path. And I feel that one was the one with all the beautiful trails and the trees and the flowers and so forth. The other path, and this one was more like an accident that happened in my life. It wasn't one that I necessarily could have done a whole lot different, but it's an example that, maybe sometimes you can do your best to avoid the dead ends or the things that are going to happen in life, but things are going to happen. And that was actually is around the same time. And as you might imagine, my parents were very upset that I didn't go to college, and they were not happy that I was getting married. And rather than, get to know us, talk like we had done in the past, it was it was a very rough time. And I was very open to talking and discussing, but what in hindsight I think happened is problems that were looming in their relationship came to the surface because of this, what would be to them, right, would have been to them a very challenging external challenge. And since they didn't have their own unity, it became a severing point. Long story short, in no uncertain words, I was disowned from the family. And there was a number of years of rocky relationship in between as well, a lot of pushing and pulling. And so that was a dead end that happened in my life, and a very, very traumatic one. This is going to make more sense later when I bring up a list of things, why this ties in. And sometimes life is going to deal you a hand of cards that, you just have to deal with it. And like I said, this is going to come up a little bit more later. Well, my goal is in presenting this is more like a thought exercise, because the sooner you can really assess, the core topic of this is values. How do you value yourself, and what do you see as adding value, where you bring value to the table. And knowing this can really be tremendously helpful. Knowing how you want that. So I should just go into an example here. This will make it a lot easier. So when I was assessing getting married or going to college, right? It seemed like two options, which I could have done both. That was definitely an option, but getting married, there was something deep inside of me that knew that I wanted to be married. I was never the girl that was like dreaming of her wedding and planning all that out. But I just knew that that was part of my future. And so that was something that I valued, and something that was I saw as part of my identity or my future identity. And so when I was making the decision about whether to get married at that time of life, because 19 used to be a very normal age to get married, but in the area that I grew up, I'm a kind of a cusper. They call it a millennial, Gen Z millennial, kind of in that gray area. That was an area where young ladies were really, really, really being pushed into getting their education, college, and so forth. And so getting married at that time was not necessarily supported, at least in my circles and in my family. Although it seemed like my classmates, if I perceived correctly, some of them like, oh my gosh, you can get married at this age. So it is interesting. It's very interesting looking back. So I'm really grateful that I had that sense of self, that I knew that I valued and wanted that as a part of my future self to be married, and that I needed to cash in those cards. I needed to play those cards that were in hand, because I didn't know when I was going to get, as good of a hand or better, not just betting on that I was going to get better someday. And I'm so grateful that I did. So it comes down to values. The other thing about value was the decision whether or not to go to college. And like I mentioned, I did the actual math on college. And while I knew that I valued being educated, I always valued having being able to use information and knowledge and apply it and have skills that I could apply and earn money. I also used those same math skills that I learned in school and did the math on how much it would cost to get that education and how long it would take to pay that off, and with the estimated income that I would earn. And so this sense of value was not just about education, right? I'm so grateful that I brought it into the bigger picture of, well, I already know that I can educate myself. I had already at that time learned 2 other languages other than my native language of English, and had applied those skills. And so I was thankfully able to think very clearly and know that, yes, I value education, but there are many ways to get that education. And then many ways I had been learning at that point by doing a business with my soon-to-be husband, that there were other ways of making money other than working a job. And we get into that in our John and Tara podcast and how that journey has gone for us. So thankfully at that time in my life, a very pivotal time, again, I was 19, coming out of high school, potentially going into college, but then decided to get married. Thankfully, I took that time to really assess, okay, what is it that I see in my future? And I certainly didn't want to see $100,000 in debt, but I also saw I wanted to be with this man who I had met, and wanted to take that forward in a more committed way. And so I was able to tune into my values and what I saw into my future. And so this is what I'm trying to do here. Hopefully I'm catching you while you're in those early 20s and you can really dig in and tune in. And even if you're later in life, this is absolutely still very useful, because you may find yourself going down a path that maybe it's already starting to feel not quite right. And you can tune back into those values, and maybe where you saw yourself at a different point in life and reel it back before it turns into a big dead end. So maybe I should illustrate that a bit. What's a big dead end? Well, a big dead end for me, I think that I avoided would have been that $100,000 plus of debt, being in a career that may or may not have been rewarding, but definitely would have been strapped to that career, whether I liked it or not, because would have had all that debt to pay off. I avoided a dead end by following, I think, my intuition, my inner knowing, and values, like I'm getting at, by marrying my husband, what then would have been a young age, but a very typical age of 19. And taking that path so it can grow and flourish, rather than going, it's not time for this. I think it's not time for this. I'm going to keep going down this route, or I'm going to go down this route that I've been coached over the years and years and years to take. And so rather than the dead end, I feel that I really experienced the flourishing route. And it can happen in many, many other ways. So another thing is, what I saw in marriage also is I wanted the family life. And I didn't necessarily get the family life that I exactly envisioned, and that's for a whole nother podcast. But I'm so glad that I at least pursued that, and to understand that a family is what you make it, and that's one of the things that you have to work with in life. Again, what are the cards that life is dealing you? Rather than putting that off, which, I hear a lot about these days, where women are coached to go to college, get their career started, get well into their career, and push off dating, marriage, and family to a point where all of a sudden they're to an age where maybe they're still not married, or they're coming to an age where there's fertility issues, and all really because there's been so much coaching to get the career in place. And believe me, I mean, I loved school, A's all day, and really felt rewarded by good grades and all that. But, and like I said, wasn't the kid playing house. I was actually, I recall being teased for playing house and dolls and so forth. But inside of me, deep inside, I knew that was what I wanted. And, I had this kind of romantic vision in a way. If anyone remembers watching Little House on the Prairie, or reading the books, but really watching the series, I think had this romanticism of, ma and pa, and, life was tough, but, they made the best of it. They were loving and smiling and beautiful towards each other. They had a beautiful family. And I think that romanticism, I soaked that up. And even though I didn't feel like I could really show that that's what I wanted, I could keep it inside and really soak it up. And for someday I can make that come true. And I'm really, really glad that I followed that inner desire and the inkling. And so that's what I want to get to. What are those inner desires, those deep inner desires and inklings that that you have, and define you in a way? And believe me, I'm really careful about using that terminology, that, be really careful about deciding and acknowledging what does define you and what you identify as, because it can really, really, really shape your life. And tapping into that deeper sense of, is this the direction that I want to go? Because some paths are so narrow, you can't turn around. And so knowing ahead of time, and I'm not encouraging even over analyzing, this is really tuning into your heart, into yourself, and that inner knowing. So here's what I want to propose. And this is really just an exercise to get to know yourself better. And on a very deep level, what is it that you value. So we all have an innate sense of value, our self-esteem, our sense of self, and who we are. And that's going to be, we're going to either, if we just paint the extremes, right? We have extreme narcissism, someone who's just like is all about them, and you have the person that is just all about other people or other things. They don't value, they value everything else above themselves. Hopefully you're somewhere in between. And yes, all healthy individuals have some degree of narcissism. We have to have a sense of self to be able to say, you don't get to do that to me, for example. You value yourself enough. Or, maybe I'm going to take that last sliver of chocolate cake, might be okay on an occasion. And so, first of all, where would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? If 1 is, everyone and everything else has more value than me. Then I mean that in a sense, like it's really a sense of self-worth and self-value. It's not because you've taken like some religious vow, for example, and you deem everything else to have more of a value than you. Or, the other extreme 10 would be the extreme narcissist where everyone else is below you and doesn't deserve anything. Somewhere in between, I'm sure vast majority of you are. And just rate yourself just as a self-awareness exercise. If you have a hard time negotiating prices, negotiating contracts, negotiating in general, you're going to be more along the lower end of the scale, which is, it's not bad. It's just, these are things you'll have to overcome, right? And then if you're good at that, those are good examples. You're going to be on the higher end of the scale, and each of them have their strengths and their weaknesses. So consider that perhaps just like if we're imagining a stool, that is your stool, the seat and the back. Okay. Then let's consider the other things that you consider valuable as a part of yourself. And those will be the legs that prop up this stool. And so for me, for example, I didn't know it. I was becoming more aware how much my family of origin and the family I would create were very important to me. And I also learned during that early time that I was illustrating earlier, the third leg of the stool was education and knowledge application, but really digging down and recognizing that I didn't have to pay hundreds of or tens of thousands of dollars to get that education, but it was still a very intrinsic value to me. And so there you see we're building the support for this stool, right? For me, it was family origin, family that I wanted to create, and education to begin with. We can add other things later. Other examples might be kind of related to education. Maybe you have special, unique, or well-developed abilities. Maybe it's your position in a family. And so you might highly value, for example, being a mother and really, really identify with that position. It also might be your lineage or heritage or something passed down to you. It might be a past accomplishment that you really stand on and have built upon. Could be another leg. It also could be your work. And think of work as a broader category. It doesn't necessarily have to be your job or a career. It could also be volunteer work, community work, and so forth. And it could also be your faith. And this is one that, for me, developed. I had a good faith early on in life, and it's one that it kind of hung out there as, thankfully, as another stool leg, but in my more recent past have developed even more. And I'll tell you, when one leg disappears, like for me, a large part of that was family of origin, had a bit of a nub, thankfully, in my grandmother, which has flourished. I had reconnected with a few other people who are very dear to me. So thankfully that leg of origin, family of origin, didn't entirely go away, but nearly. But I could rely on these other legs to then support me. So the family that I created, I came into a family of amazing in-laws, an amazing husband. So at the point where my family of origin was falling away, my new family was there to support me. At a time where my family of origin was falling away, which is like really, I think losing your family of origin is, we have this phrase of having the rug pulled out from under you. And it really is like that emotionally, just because everything you've learned is from these people. And fortunately, at that time, the other analogy I imagined regarding this is I was leaving, imagine taking a step from one stone to another stone, and there's rushing water in between. Just as one stone was being washed away, I was stepping to the new stone of my new family. And fortunately, they were there. They were there to catch me. Things were transitioning well. And back to the stool analogy. So fortunately, I had these other legs to hold me up. The leg that at the same time I was assessing about education, fortunately, I hadn't put all my weight on that one yet, but I knew inside that, okay, this is not the only route. This is not the only route this is not my only option, I suppose would be the best way to say that. And so I still had that leg to stand on as well. And so this exercise is really about noticing what are your primary legs to stand on. Like I mentioned, later in life, I reinforced that faith leg. And boy, can that really help reinforce the other legs as well. That one has magical powers, honestly. So this exercise can do amazing things. And most of all, what it's meant to do is help you to get really in tune and in touch with yourself. And so when an opportunity comes up or when you feel unsettled about something, you can go back and ask yourself, okay, does this align with my primary values and what I really am aligned with? And but that coming back can help you to go down those florid routes rather than the dead ends. And I would really like to hear any more, what are the stool legs that you come up with? Anything outside of this list that I gave you? What are some for you? And would love to hear too any stories of dead ends that you were able to avoid. Maybe even stories of dead ends you weren't able to avoid that might be helpful lessons for other people. Because we're all on this journey together, and we're connected in some way or another. And we have life lessons to learn, but if we can share and learn from one another, we can really, really prevent, not only prevent pain, but encourage wonderful feelings and wonderful results in life. So would really love to hear from you on this one. How does it sit for you? It's especially powerful if you're in your late teens, early 20s, early adult phase of life, but it can be helpful at any phase. And yeah, I would love to hear from you. Make sure to like, subscribe, share this with someone if someone came to mind and you think they could be helped by this. And yeah, have a wonderful day, everybody. I'll see you around. I'm here every day around sunrise, except for Sundays. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Take care.